Good evening and welcome to everyone. You are welcome to the 1stGenYale Career Speaker Series. And tonight we're very pleased to have Michele Moorman coming to talk to our group regarding how promotion decisions are made. We selected this topic because obviously getting a job is very challenging and very important. But obviously once you get there, most people want to know, how do I advance? How do I get paid more? And everything else. And again, this is sponsored by 1stGenYale. The purpose of 1stGenYale, if you're not familiar with us, is to enhance the lives of undergraduates as well as alumni of 1stGen students. But also we open these programs up to the broader Yale community. And with that, we're going to begin with a few housekeeping tips. One, this session is being recorded tonight. And second, everyone's going to be put on mute. But if you have questions, please put those into the chat because we'll come to a question and answer section. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Michele probably about 4 or 5 opening questions and leave the majority of time for your questions. So this is your evening in terms of what you would like to discuss and what you would like to know. And again, put those questions in the chat as soon as they come to mind, and we'll have those moderated and called out when we get to that section. I also want to, you've already met Lisa Chapman. She is the founder of 1stGenYale, and the reason that we're all here for these types of webinars and other events. And I also want to introduce to you Valerie Pop. She's going to be managing our Zoom this evening. If there are any problems with Zoom or your audio or hearing, contact Lisa Chapman. And again, if there's any problems at all, just contact Lisa. So with that, I'm going to ask Michele to tell us a little bit about herself and how she arrived at her current level of responsibility.
Hi, thank you so much, Michael. And good evening to everyone who's joined us. I'm super excited to be here and to share this time with you. So my name is Michele Pinder Moorman. I am class of 1990 from Yale College in Branford. And currently I've recently started a new role as the director of HR and talent acquisition of a startup company called Resilience Lab, which is based here in New York City, which provides accessible and affordable behavioral health support to clients. And I literally just started the job, so it's very new for me, but I'm super excited about that. And so my journey to being in the HR and talent space started many, many years ago. After Yale, I took a couple of years off and worked here in Manhattan, and then went to Harvard Law School. And following graduation, for the 12 years after I graduated in 1995, I was a corporate attorney. So I practiced in mergers and acquisitions, some finance work, and general corporate work, both at a large firm here in the city, at a mid-sized firm, and then ultimately finished my career in-house counsel at Starwood Hotels. And it was during my time at Starwood where I really started to think about what else I wanted to do. I liked what I did in many respects. It was a great company, and I really enjoyed working with the folks that I was working with, but there was a part of me that just kept thinking, I don't see myself, negotiating and drafting contracts for the rest of my working life, right? And I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I felt I needed a change. And so I took about a year and a half, I worked with a career coach to just do assessments and figure out what I wanted to perhaps pursue, talked with a ton of people, like informational conversations and that kind of thing, reading. And ultimately what sort of came out of that was that I was very drawn to working with people, right? Whether HR, teaching, coaching, things along those lines. And so I thought, okay, this is where I want to go. How do I create something or find something in that space? And at the time, law firms were starting to build out those roles internally. So it was like professional development and training, the diversity and inclusion departments of law firms. And so I ultimately made my way into doing talent work for the legal community, and have been doing that up until recently, since like 2007. And so currently, and in my prior role, I've run the gamut from traditional HR in terms of benefits and payroll and things of that nature. But the bulk of what I've done, and I think what I at my heart sort of enjoy the most, is what I call the talent part, right? So helping individuals and colleagues navigate the workplace, whether it's figuring out a difficult situation, whether it's, how to think about getting promoted and put yourself in the pipeline to do that, working with leadership to really understand what was happening with the people that they worked with, and how to think about who succeeds and who doesn't, and to really get behind that information and that process. And so I really love what I do. I gave myself a year after practicing to make a decision about going back, and I haven't looked back. And I'm I'm thrilled that I was fortunate enough to find my way here.
Well, since we're talking about promotions tonight, Michele, when you were first in the room where promotions were being discussed, describe what you saw actually happen versus what you thought would be happening.
Sure. Looking back on it, I think I really thought it would sort of stick almost to like a script, right? So part of my role in going to those meetings and being there was to pull together all the information that was needed to start making those decisions. So I'll call it a portfolio. So it's information about evaluations, a resume for the people that we're talking about being promoted, what they've done since their time at the company and things like that. And so you pull together this information and the stakeholders and the individuals who are making the decision are in the room. And I really thought, you look at the information and talk about it and kind of quickly make a yes, no decision. And certainly that was part of what we talked about. But what surprised me the most in many respects was how much else came into that conversation, right? Some of which was anecdotal. It was, oh, I knew Michele she used to sit on my floor and she seemed nice. And, we chatted a few times, to things that are a little more substantive around, oh, I heard she does really good work. I've heard, so-and-so's okay, but they had some missteps on this particular project. Conversations around the business and how many people can get promoted right now, right? So maybe there's 6 people that are up for promotion, and whether due to budgetary or other reasons, there's a decision that you can't put them all through. So you've got to start, there's some level of comparing individuals, right, in terms of their experience and how long have they been in line to get promoted. Did we promote someone in this division last time? Maybe it's the other division needs to go next. All kinds of interesting conversations around the business and the economics and the dynamics that go into making those decisions, in addition to just looking at the portfolio or whatever it was that we put together.
And if you look at that process and the times you've been in those types of rooms, what surprised you about what factors were considered regarding whether to promote someone or not? What surprised you?
I think what surprised me the most initially was really I'll call it the anecdotal thing. So it's what I call the little things. How do you present yourself? Like, in terms of, do you speak to people when you see them? How do you show up at meetings? Do you contribute to meetings that you're a part of? How do people know that you want to be promoted, right? So some part of this, and we'll talk about that later, is making it very clear to the relevant people in that process that this is something I really want, and let's talk about how I can go about trying to get there, right? What have you contributed, that's unique or different or created, right? In terms of what you've contributed to the team or to the organization. Those are some of the things. I also think it's not just about doing good work. Like, obviously that's part of it. That's a meaningful part of it, but it's not just about coming in every day, doing really good work, not having anything negative about you in the space. If there's more to it than that, right? And so, like I said, some of it's the anecdotal things. Some of it is also the advocacy piece. So who in the room is advocating for you to move forward in a promotional space, right? And hearing how different people advocate for the people they're trying to get promoted was always very fascinating to me in terms of what mattered. And then, like I said earlier, some of it's just the economics and the understanding around who gets priority over the other person. And it isn't often tied to necessarily their work, it's tied to some other factors.
Well, if you're looking at the audience, they're sitting outside of these rooms being discussed. So yeah. Can you talk about what they can control and what they're not able to control? What can they do to enhance their chances of getting that promotion?
Absolutely. And I think for me, this is one of the biggest, I'll say, aha moments, right? For me, is realizing you can control only but so much, and then the rest sort of is to some large degree out of your hands. But I think you can control 2 things. You can control what you know about the process and what formally is happening, and I'll talk about that. And then you can control what you do. And so in terms of what you do, I think particularly now, and maybe not so much when I was earlier in my career, but absolutely right now, if you want to be put in line to be promoted, or that's a goal that you have it wherever you're working or to be working, you need to tell them that, right? And there's no arrogance around it, right? There's no inappropriateness around it. You can say, look, I really like it here. I see myself potentially having a career here. So I'd love to have some conversations about what it'll take for me to move to the next level, right? And I think so that it's abundantly clear that that's what you want. And then you can work in partnership with, your supervisor and other people to sort of map out what that looks like in the timeline. I also think you need to sort of understand the structure in which you're operating. And by that, I mean, most organizations have some formal evaluation and promotion process. You need to understand when that's happening. So the timing, is it year end? Is it, in June? When does that happen? To the extent there are forms that are being filled out, or evaluation materials that are given, whether to the people that evaluate you and or for you to fill out in terms of a self-evaluation, you need to see what they are. So if that's not part of the onboarding process, or it's something that you just don't normally have access to, you really should ask for that. I think that's perfectly appropriate. And the last part of that is understanding if there are particular criteria that you're being evaluated or looked at against, right? Where I came from when I was at law firms, we called them benchmarks, so that by this point in your career, you should understand or know how to do X, Y, or Z things, and you should be exhibiting certain behaviors, right? And so if you don't even understand the structure that you're working in, sometimes I think it's hard to navigate that and plan about how to be promoted. And the last thing I'll say is understand end of the fiscal year of the organization you work for. And I say that because assuming, say it's a calendar year, like January to December fiscal year, by like early fall, they're putting in the budget for the following year. And part of the budget that your line and stream, the person leading your group has to include is sort of the people part. And so how much do you want to pay for salaries? Are we allocating for salaries for the following year? And if Michelle's going to get promoted, or if I'm going to get promoted, presumably my salary is going to increase, and that would be factored in. And certainly that doesn't, there's wiggle room with that, but there are conversations, I'm doing the budget, I think Michelle's up for promotion, she'll probably make it this year, so let me throw in an extra blank, versus I don't think she's going to make it, maybe not, I won't put it in. And you may not know that the details of that conversation, but it is happening. So if you know when that you can estimate when those conversations happen, you can back up when you should really start being more forward and I'll say aggressive in a positive way about wanting to be promoted and moving forward that way.
Well, thank you. And my next question is, I've seen a lot of people over the years who were on that fast track and then somehow they found a way to derail themselves. Can you talk about the most significant mistakes that people make that take them off that promotion track? Many times they don't even know that they're off the track.
No, yeah.
So, what have you observed?
I've observed, I think, that the amount of time you're at an organization doesn't translate to automatically getting promoted. So if you say, well, I've been here 3 or 4 years or 5 years and I've done good work and everything's been fine, so of course they're going to promote me. Just because you've been there a certain amount of time does not automatically mean it's going to happen. And it also doesn't automatically mean that you're sort of in the queue to get even in position to get promoted. So that's something to not get sort of make an assumption around. I think that you also have to be intentional about who you're, or mindful of who you're working for, right? So when the decisions are being made about promotions, I'll be honest, in the room, certain voices matter more than others, right? That's just the nature of the dynamics of workplaces. I don't know that I think it's fair, but I think that's just the reality, right? And so if you're doing really great work for someone whose, clout or reputation or perceived value to the organization isn't as strong as someone else's, their voice and their weight, their input may not matter as much. And so you have to, as you're going about working with people, you can figure some of this out. I mean, who's speaking up at meetings, right? Who's being spotlighted in certain circumstances? You talk with people and you get a sense of the people that maybe your colleagues who have a little bit more weight. And so part of the conversations with your supervisor and others is in moving towards the promotion process is, who do I need to work with so that I'm in line to be considered? Like, ask that question, right? Because I've seen people, I've been in rooms where the person has it's excellent in terms of the report, but the people that are supporting them aren't the right people, right? And so you've got to be mindful of that, I think, part of the process. I do think also sometimes I've seen it, not come to pass because there is you're not aware of sort of the business case, for lack of a better term, that has to be made to get you promoted, right? So you can't assume that only the people in your division are up for promotion, right? Depending how your company's structured or your organization, there could be 7 people across different streams, many of whom you don't work with, who are also at your level who are up for promotion. And so understanding that you're one of many and figuring out who those individuals are, not to be competitive per se, but to at least be knowledgeable about who else is up and what may be swaying the decisions that year, that cycle. I think is something that you sort of stay in your little zone and you stay in your lane and you're not aware that all these other people are up too. And that can come as a surprise.
Wow. And I'm about to open up to questions for the audience, and Lise Chapman is going to read your questions from chat. If you have questions, feel free to start keying them in right now, and I'm going to turn things over to Lise, who's going to read the questions that are available, and then once we've subsided, I'll have a few additional questions that we'll go to from there. So Lise?
Great. Michael, thank you very much. And thank you, Michelle. That was a wonderful introduction as to kind of the nuances of promotions. Let me start our first question with Anissa Noorani. Anissa, great to see you. We're so glad you're here. Anissa is one of our very early volunteers when we started 1stGenYale in 2016. So I'm so glad to see you back again. Let me go to your question, which is, what if your company doesn't really have a structure for promotions? And what if your manager doesn't have an answer for you when you ask him, what does it take to reach the next level? Michael, let me start with you first. How would you answer that question? Michael, you're muted.
The key thing is if your manager doesn't know, that tends to be a warning sign, either that they don't know, which means they're out of the loop, or they don't want to tell you, which tells you something else. And every organization has a process by which people are promoted, unless the organization is in a financially unstable situation and you don't see anyone being promoted. So the question is, you look at what you're told, but you look at what's going on. And if you see people getting higher salaries, getting different titles, et cetera, that means that there's a promotion process in place. But if you can't get someone to share that with you, those tend to be warning signs. Michelle?
Yeah.
And Michael, when you say warning signs, before Michelle, what do you mean warning signs? What
Warning signs are, is this manager on my side? Do they have access to the right levels of authority to get me promoted? Or are they supportive of my career? All those kinds of things, those are warning signs. Or is there a financial situation where everything is frozen, there's no salary increases, no one's moving, and maybe the next step is to have layoffs?
Thank you. Michelle, how would you answer that?
Yeah, I would agree with Michael that to me it would set off something I'd have to think about in terms of why is this not, particularly if it's happening around you, like why it's not happening in your stream. I don't think there's any harm if there's someone who's recently promoted or that you could say, look, I'm curious sort of what your process was like or how it unfolded. Even though I work in HR, I'm very aware that going to HR to talk about things sometimes has a stigma attached to it, or there's a fear and anxiety around that. And I appreciate that. But I do think if at a certain point you're not getting answers, it's appropriate to, and you can say, I'm just curious about the process here. I've been here for a while and I'm interested in staying. Could I meet with you to talk a little bit about the promotion process, right? As opposed to, I need to know, no one's telling me, and you can communicate that, but to get that initial meeting, sort of approaching it more as, I'm curious, I would love to hear your, in feedback on what the process is to at least get that conversation started.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Next question is from Ryan Davis. Let me just pull this up. Why can't I do this? Ryan's class of master's in chemistry, master's in science in 2018. Ryan, thank you for your question. How do you make moves to different roles out of the scope or promotion track of your current role and get promoted instead of it just being a lateral move? Michelle, how would you answer that question?
Having learned that lesson myself, I think there's no harm in talking to people. I found that if you work with, even if someone you're not directly working with, but you're interested in what they're doing, remember your colleagues, right? You work for the same organization, even if it's not linear, right? And so saying, I'd love to talk, I'm curious in this project you're working on, I read this thing, I heard something X, Y, or Z. I'd love to take 15 minutes or 20 minutes, if you don't mind, to talk a little bit about what you're doing, about how you came to come work for the company, what kind of work you all are doing, and starting the conversations that way. I would also personally get really clear about what other areas are you interested in working in, in terms of, and how are they aligned with, or is there a story you can tell around how you can move from where you are to another division or something like that. Sometimes it's acquiring a different skill or getting a certification or, enhancing what you're bringing to the table. But trying to sort of meet with people in those areas and learn what they do, I think is a great first step. And showing that you're interested by what you're, not just what you're saying, but what you're doing and how it can be aligned.
Michael, how would you answer that question? Because you're in a current position, but you want to move to a different position that's not really in track of what you're currently in terms of your position. So
Well,
how do you deal with that?
Well, I fully agree with what Michele said, and I think you have to have a strategy. And part of that strategy might be maybe you can volunteer for that department on certain occasions. Maybe you can work on a intergroup task force where you start building relationships with people in different departments. Even your pure volunteer activity, like some organizations will have a United Way committee, and you'll get a chance to work with senior leaders from different parts of the organization, because people look at the technical skills, which you can build through outside education and those kinds of things, but they look at those interactions that they've had with you as an individual. And when you volunteer for something like the United Way or the company sports team or whatever that is, they get to build a relationship with you and get to know you, and you get the chance to talk to them in a different way, and that can open the path to another opportunity. And there's nothing wrong with letting someone know, hey, I think I'm interested in your area of work, and I come and talk to you about it. That way they know you're interested, but they've gotten to know you in these other contexts, and you've been working on building the skills, and you've been volunteering in the area. It's a very easy thing to do if an opening occurs. I'd much rather trust someone who I know, who I've worked with, than someone in hiring a complete stranger from off the street with no other context.
Thank you. Thank you. Anissa has another kind of follow-up question, which I think is a tricky question in terms of, you're trying to figure out, where you are and what you're doing, and you see opportunities to be promoted, but you don't understand or know how others are being paid. So how do you figure out what you're worth or what you could be paid in a promotion, but you don't feel comfortable asking your colleagues about their salary? So how do you get information to help you negotiate a higher position?
That's definitely tricky. There are certain ways that you can sort of back into it through public information. This is not a pitch for Glassdoor, but if your company's on there and people are posting their salaries, that's one place to just look and say, oh, this level is getting about this comp. Often, there's some that are obviously not 100% accurate, but maybe you can get a sense there. Is there market information you can find? Go on LinkedIn, go on Indeed or some other, job placement or job search engine, and search for jobs that are similar to what you're doing, what you want to do, and see if they post the compensation. Again, asking people directly, I know it can be tricky. There are ways at some point, and again, I think if you're really being planful and thoughtful about trying to get promoted, that can also be part of the conversation, right? So all these things can be rolled into, whether it's meeting with your supervisor or someone else. So I want to do this. Do you have any sense of what the next salary band is? So I don't need to know the dollar amount, but am I gonna, if I were to move from this position to the next, is it 5,000, like 10,000? Like how much, what comes economically with making that shift? And I think to the extent you can sort of get the information from not just walking up to someone saying, how much do you make? Because that's not often going to go well.
Yeah.
There are ways to sort of, maybe suss that out differently. Another thing that you can do is you can ask people outside the organization in terms of, hey, I'm interested in becoming a senior analyst.
Right.
What's the salary range for those kinds of jobs? And if you talk to a few people who work at different organizations who are either alumni of Yale or connections that you've met or people you met through connections, you can get an idea as to what the salary range. But the key thing is, in terms of salary negotiation, is to know what it is you want. And if there's an amount below which you won't find acceptable, that tells you a little bit in terms of what you're negotiating is going to be. But again, you can do a lot of research to find out what the salary range should be.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Another question is here from Tina Franklin. What is the best approach to find out who outside of your circle or department is up for a promotion in that next cycle?
you may not always know that. I think, well, there's a couple of things. I'm staring a little bit on it. Whether or not if you have your boss may be able to tell you, oh, well, my division, this division, that division's putting people up. And you have a sense of, if you're all around the same title, right around the same level, just like that anecdotally, you can assume, and that you've kind of been there around the same period of time, that you can assume that there's a potential that those other individuals are also potentially being put up. It's also possible to, I don't know, I'm a little stumped on that, I have to be honest. I don't know if there's a perfect way to get that information.
That's
But Michael,
right.
what do you think?
Michael, what do you think, Michael?
One, I tend not to worry about it. I never have. But here are the signs that there are other people who are on a track that you might not be on. If someone is consistently appointed to these special assignments and you're not, that tells you something in terms of where you stand versus where they stand. If there's a award, let's say the company has an award in a quarter, and certain individuals in your peer group are getting awarded consistently for performance, and you're not, that tells you something. If you know that there are stock grants or something, or bonuses that are given, and certain people are giving those things and you're not, that gives you an idea in terms of who may be on a faster track, or who is aligned with who you perceive to be the most powerful people in the organization. Who are they supporting? Who do they bring to them with meetings? There's a lot of things that you can observe that will tell you who you're competing against, but also tell you where you stand in terms of being a competitor for upward mobility. But the key thing is, do they actively support you in some way that tells you that you have somebody on your side when they're in that room that Michele described? And if at some point you don't feel that someone is, it will show up in terms of other people progressing forward and you're not. You have to make a decision in terms of whether you stay or whether you go someplace else.
Yeah, Michael, that brings to mind when I was working at Merrill Lynch, the people who were chosen to be in the PR campaigns, who were chosen to be a spokesperson, to go out and talk to a group, who were asked to speak at a lunch, who were asked to represent the company in some form. Those people were appointed, you could see them in terms of the opportunities they were given outside of their daily job, but for the company, and how they actually progressed further because of their leadership in volunteer work or other work related that helps support the company, right? Is that, you guys see that? You guys are nodding?
I would totally agree. And even who gets invited to the leadership conference, right? That was one of my signs when I was in this space, and I was like, they started after me. We had the same title. They got invited and I didn't. And there was no objective. It wasn't a money thing. There was no objective reason that I could determine why I wasn't included, right? And so I agree. All of those sort of directly external to your job signs are ways that you can figure out who's in play and who maybe not be.
Yeah, and who gets invited to sit at the corporate gift dinner? You have to have a representative who gets invited. Big question. That's fantastic. Thank you. Let's go to Kimberly Golho. Do you have suggestions for those in an environment which has frequent leadership turnover, with short institutional memory and new managers who come and go and need to learn who the top performers are, and then leave before the next promotion cycle, and then happens again? What do you do if you're an employee that's below this level but seeing it happen? And how do you advocate for yourself to deal with promotions while the leadership is turning over?
Michele?
Yeah, I mean, I think first I'd get curious why it keeps turning over. If I can be honest, I think I'm not saying there is instability, but there is a sign that there's instability or some inconsistency. And I mean, it could just be a coincidence, but I would just personally start to wonder a little bit, like, what's going on here that people aren't willing to stay or why they're leaving. That's sort of part of it. I think that particularly if it's someone that you to work directly with, part of your introduction with them is saying let me introduce myself to you. I've been here for this number of years. I've done these things. I've achieved these goals. I've created X, Y, or Z initiatives. My goal is to make, vice president, or my goal is to do, to reach this level at the organization next. And so, I look forward to working with you to try to achieve that. There could be an opportunity to educate in an appropriate way. So not like a patronage, but educate them around not just about yourself, but about some of the things that are either in process in terms of initiatives or things that are going on, or things that you or your teams that you were on created that were successful, and maybe not successful and you've learned from it, right? So you could try to create it as an opportunity to be an ally with this person, but you absolutely need to introduce yourself to them so they know who you are, because they may not be inquisitive enough to ask. They're concerned with making their own impression, right? So I think that that's definitely something that you, as much as you can, should try to take some initiative on.
And I would add, when someone's new to an organization that's fast moving, they're under an incredible amount of pressure to produce. And the more you can do to be useful, to help that person, to give them insight, etc., it makes a difference. I mean, I remember one organization where I worked, a woman who worked there at a fairly low level. She was extremely good with PowerPoint. And she was able to help develop some of the presentations. And all of a sudden, she was always in the room with the senior leaders. And all of a sudden, she was promoted. And all of a sudden, she was promoted again. And all of a sudden, she had accelerated her career because she was very good at one thing that several new people needed. And they saw her as valuable, and they built a relationship with her because they had to spend so many hours together in these meetings, doing presentations, going on the road together, etc. And that's how she distinguished herself. She made herself useful. She built a strong relationship, and she produced.
That's great. For both Michele and Michael, many in our audience are from diverse backgrounds, not just first gen and low income, but also various backgrounds of ethnicity, gender, race, political thought, and all the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you just address a little bit how DEI is factoring into promotions, and what people of color, people of diverse backgrounds, people from low income, first generation, what kinds of things do they need to do to work ahead, to promote themselves, to advocate for themselves, and not be afraid? And what kinds of ways is there support for them in the system? And what advice would you give?
Michele?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a couple of things. I think that, and I certainly can speak from personal experience and myself, but also in working with other diverse, primarily attorneys, that there is it's possible, right, that the journey may be harder for you, may be more challenging in certain respects. I don't think that that's fair, but it is very much, well, certainly my experience, and I know that it's been other people's experience. I think all the things that we've talked about in terms of being aware, in terms of understanding the system you're working within, in terms of being intentional about what you're trying to create, I think applies even more so if that's where you're coming from, right? Because there's not as much benefit of the doubt given to you, frankly, when things don't go 100% correctly, or when you're not connecting with someone, or when it's not perceived as something close to perfect or ideal, right? And so I do think how you approach your job and the level of professionalism and intention behind it is something that you absolutely should pay attention to. And I understand the urge to think you shouldn't have to do it. I completely understand that, but the reality is still that you do. Having said that, many companies and other organizations do have formal, DEI networks. They have affinity groups, which often can be tremendous resources in terms of know-how, in terms of just normalizing what you're going through and having someone who can get what you're experiencing and isn't going to judge you around it, in terms of speakers and other resources that you can have access to. There's social opportunity, there's community service opportunities, which also are opportunities to get to know other colleagues at your organization. And so as much as you're interested in what they're doing, I would certainly engage with any formal program or whatever that you have at your company to see how it can support you. And I also think you have to, the notion that you have to work harder, right, and be better, I still think to some degree that unfortunately that tends to be the case. Like I said, a lot of it is who gets the benefit of the doubt in the room and who doesn't. It's clear that is still something that is a challenge. And one area where I do see also for folks from the a DEI background or population is around the social stuff, right? So some of it can be, there's always that notion of going out after work, but how social are you and how are you interacting with your peers in terms of what do you do this weekend, in terms of maybe grabbing lunch, in terms of, volunteering to be part of something, right? And some of this is I will say acting, but some of it is really sort of finding a way to engage on a level that you're comfortable with, but showing that you're interested in both your colleagues and in the organization. And so, again, part of being intentional is all of that. And I wouldn't just sit back and hope it's going to come to you, or sit back and wait for people to bring you in. Sometimes you have to sort of put yourself out there and take the risk. And I find now, and I found, and certainly sitting in rooms where we talked about promotion, or even just who's doing well and who's on track, that those things matter, and they still do. And hopefully we'll get to a point where they don't, but as of right now, I think they still matter.
And I would definitely support what Michele just said. And you have to have a game plan. You're gonna have to work very hard at it. The worst thing you can do if you want to advance in an organization is just to sit there, work hard, and literally be invisible.
Yeah.
All those outside interactions, those relationships that you develop, you're gonna have to do more of it. More people are gonna have to know who you are. You're gonna have to produce at a very high level.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna have to go to the social things, and you want to build relationships with other organizations as well, and have as broad a network as possible so that you have options. But all those, it's not only just the work performance. They're looking at you as a total person, and you want to build enough alliances that you are also receiving information, because there's a lot going on that's not discussed at the meetings. You know, what's happening in this department? Is there a new leader coming in? All the kinds of things. And if you're not in that loop of information, you're at a disadvantage. If you're not someone that hears about major things before they're happening, that's not good to be in that situation. Mm-hmm. So, and I can say very early in my career, someone, in fact, a white colleague came over to me and said, look, this is how you're going to be looked at when you go to a client. So you're going to have to know more than I do. You're going to have to know more technically. But what he did beyond that is said, these are the books you need to read. These are the extra tests you need to take. These are the things you need to do to make sure that you're really prepared. And I ended up getting the highest level of sales in the organization within 4 or 5 years. And I always would thank him for that instruction, because that's what made a difference in terms of work ethic.
Absolutely.
I have a follow-on comment from Michele and Michael. And for diversity, equity, and inclusion, to me, it's also a gift. It's a gift to have diverse viewpoints and personalities and perspectives around a table. That you only get that by having a diverse group of people who are there around the table, not the same kind, not the same outlook. But in terms of the contribution people make from diverse backgrounds, it's really a gift. And we need to celebrate that gift in employment, in schools, as we do in 1stGenYale. We celebrate diversity because we find we're better off. We're all better off having more people around the room who feel comfortable with their perspective, sharing their views, sharing their understandings, giving their reference of when they see in a situation or an opportunity. So maybe can you guys just a little bit address about the celebration of diversity, equity, and inclusion and in promotion decisions and how that can be a plus?
Michele?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with what you said. I think because there's such a richness, and it's a whole different perspective that you can bring, whether it's an ad campaign. I mean, that seems to be and you hear a lot about that on social media or whatever, but you're thinking about moving forward with a particular initiative, or you want to have a certain you're forming a project team, and there's a lot that's being thrown out in terms of how we should go about it and how things should be approached, and you should feel free to contribute. And often it's not like intentionally I'm going to say the comment that's related to diversity. It's just, this is my life experience, right? Oh, and have you thought about that, right? Or I remember looking through a annual report that one of my organizations did around the social justice and community work that they did. And it was like a mock-up. It wasn't final. And there's all these great, stock photos. And there's a photo of these young girls somewhere in Africa with these dolls with blonde, like white dolls with blonde hair. And it was aesthetically a beautiful photo. And I went to them and I said, I would highly advise that you switch this out. And she's like, oh, I don't understand why. I said, because these are the reasons from my perspective, not that I'm offended, but it is sort of reinforcing certain perspectives or stereotypes potentially that you may not want to convey. And obviously there have to be other ways that you can relate to and connotate and align with what it is that you're promoting. And she thanked me for that comment. So I think it doesn't always have to be, like I said, I'm going to make this comment. It's really just sharing who you are and your experience, right? So a lot of times around social events and everything having to be, let's have a golf outing, and it's not just about playing golf, but there's lots of other things that we can do, right? Or having it always be around, drinking, around other things. Like there's lots of other ways that we can get together and celebrate. So put some ideas on the table, plan some things, right? And I think oftentimes I've never been to any event or been part of any of those conversations where at least someone was like, oh, that's a great idea. I never thought about that. And they can often take things off in a whole different direction, which is everyone's richer for. And so I would encourage you not to sit there quietly, to just share, right? And hopefully you're in an organization that welcomes that. And as a result of what you're sharing, what other people are sharing, just has a more enhanced and enriched, product or whatever it is that you're creating.
Great, thank you. Michael? Thank you.
And I would definitely add to that. I mean, one of the things I bring to a room, no matter where I am, is that I grew up low income. And I'll sit in a room and someone will say, okay, well, let's put all these things online. The first thing I think about, well, what about people who don't have computers? What about people who have low levels of literacy? What about people who can't navigate these systems? So there's things that people don't think about, not because they're cruel, it's just that they think that everyone has what they have.
Yep.
And the thing that I will always remember is that I know a lot of people don't. And that's what happened during COVID-19. There were certain areas where they went in, they had all the signups electronically, and they wondered why the local people weren't signing up for COVID-19 vaccines, but people outside the neighborhood were driving in getting shots because the local people didn't have computers. They didn't know how to sign in. They may not have spoken the language as their first language. So the worst thing you can do in an organization if you are of diverse background is to not bring that diverse perspective into the room.
Absolutely.
And if you take all this effort, make yourself assimilate to the point where you bring no extra value, why are you there?
Right.
Because these organizations need that diversity of thought. They need that creativity. And the competition between organizations is fierce. And what you can do is help them look at problems differently, bring a broader way of looking at it, solve things differently, come up with better solutions. And if you're not doing that, you're just hurting yourself in terms of your career. So always bring who you are to your meetings, your perspectives, how you put ideas together, how you put teams together. And it can actually contribute a significant amount to your success.
Thank you. And a flip side of this, for many of us, including myself, we may be afraid to speak up at times because we have what's called the imposter syndrome. We don't think we're good enough. We don't think we're worthy of it. People aren't going to take us seriously. We work hard, we strive, we achieve, but there's a little voice on our shoulder, the imposter syndrome. How do you confront that when you're coming from a diverse background or just any background really that has this mindset of maybe I'm not good enough? How do we get that block, that barrier out of the way to move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, because I certainly, even when I was at Yale, I'll be honest, I think the first 2 years I had a good time, but I'm like, I don't know that I belong here. And it was beyond whether I wanted to physically, it was a sense that I'm not sure I'm on par with other people because their just life experiences were so vastly different from mine. And it carried forward to certain jobs that I certainly had. I found that I almost had to, and still do to some extent in certain circumstances, have to prepare for things in a way that if I explained it to someone, they'd think like, why on earth do you have to do that? Like, if I'm going into a circumstance or a meeting where I know I'm going to be afraid to speak up and I know it's important that I say something or I contribute, I will say this, let me think about how the meeting is going to flow. And when they start talking about this is literally what I'm going to say. Like I almost have to rehearse it with myself. I have to be very deliberate about it. Because if I didn't sort of have a plan in mind and I didn't craft that for myself, I know that I would just sit back and not say anything because I don't naturally speak up. So I think that that's one area. I think finding other, whether they're colleagues or friends or, through 1stGenYale or other resources that you have access to, finding other people who are having similar experiences and really using them as a way to talk through ways to break through that, right? And really, you have a very vast network that you probably aren't even 100% aware of, but other people who are similarly situated, what would you do? Or what made you overcome this, right? And not thinking that you're alone because you're completely not. You're definitely not. You would not be, from the HR perspective, you wouldn't be hired, frankly, and you wouldn't be forget promotion, but even brought into an organization if there wasn't some base belief that you could be successful there and do the job well. And so whether it's reminding yourself of that and getting support around what you may need to sort of push through that imposter syndrome and anxiety that you can have.
Thank you.
And I'll just say that, when I arrived at Yale, I was somewhat naive. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to feel comfortable at home. So I would sit in the front of the classroom because it was easier to see the chalkboard. I would speak up, and I didn't compare myself to the other people, and it worked. And the one thing I learned when I joined the organizations is that every meeting, every place you are is an interview, and they always look at whether you speak up or whether you don't. What you say, the worst thing you can do to yourself is silence.
Yeah.
The silence they assume is lack of initiative, doesn't have anything to say, etc. And I remember one time I was in a room with some people in a senior room one time, and I was a fairly junior person in that room, and Jack Welch, the CEO, was speaking. And then I think at some point they said, well, do you have any questions? And I was the first person to raise my hand and ask a question. And you'd be surprised at how many people came over to me later and said, that was a very good question. I'm glad you asked that, etc. Because they were afraid of asking a question because they knew that if you asked a dumb question, it might not work out very well. And so you have to have a lack of fear, and you have to take the chance. I mean, don't say something crazy or stupid, but I would do it, because if you don't and you're silent, you hurt yourself.
Absolutely.
And they make decisions about people based on things like that. Hey, I've been in 5 meetings with that guy, and when they're in the room that Michelle's talking about, you're not going to get promoted.
No, you're not. And they'll fill in the story. He doesn't know what he's doing.
Right.
He's in over his head. He doesn't care. He's not serious about being here, about his career. And most of all of that probably isn't even true, but they don't have anything else to base it on, right? So I'm one who I can sit through a meeting and never say anything. I mean, that's just sort of my nature. And I've feedback repeatedly, you have to say something. And so I literally go into meetings and I decide what I'm going to say. I still do it. And in certain circumstances, and it's just something I've had to develop as a practice. I don't need to share that with everyone, although I've just shared it with all of you, right? But I think and I'm a big fan.
We won't tell.
I'm a big fan of creating personal, private processes for yourself that help you be more effective. And everyone doesn't need to know you're doing it. It's just for you to shine and be the best that you can be. And when I negotiated contracts, I had a cheat sheet of provisions, and this is how you negotiate this provision. And that thing was tattered, and I kept it. And because when I got on the phone to negotiate, I was always very nervous, but it allowed me to get through that with ease. And I never told anyone I had that, right? So you have to personally decide, what can I do to boost myself and to put myself out there, and create it and use it to your advantage. And don't feel any sort of pressure around it. And then let's be clear, lots of people who are talking and don't seem like they have imposter syndrome are doing the same thing.
Yeah, and it's very competitive out there. And just know that, how do you make yourself different? How do you make yourself stand out? Because it's too competitive to be average.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, it's 7:50 and we have a couple more questions. So I'd like to get to that. And then Michael, to your poll. What happened here? Okay, Barb Petrosio had a question related to extracurricular activities, which you addressed in a way, but and how it affects promotions. But is it something where people in their employment should actually seek out other ways to connect to other employees or to their supervisors, through extracurricular activities, community service? Is it something they should be adding to their job persona, if you will? And how does it affect promotions? Those people who do community service and other events versus those who don't?
I think if you can do it and you're interested in it, I do think it's a good way to connect and make different people, because often those are, there's like a company-wide or organization-wide invite, and you're meeting people who you literally would have no interaction with on a normal basis. So I do think in that sense, it's a great thing to do. Depending on the activity and what it involves, it could be an opportunity to show leadership, right? It could be an opportunity to, lead a project or an initiative or be on a panel, right? And think about, is it something that's on that level, or is it just attending, right? Because there's a difference between just attending things, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but are there sort of those opportunities where you can take more initiative or show a bit more leadership and engagement? I've always found them to be enjoyable. I also think this, though. your work has to be solid, and you have to be in what I would say more or less, something around good standing. Because if you have what some would perceive to be an excessive amount of sort of extracurriculars, and your work is not great or it's not considered strong, that again can be fair or not reflected by, oh, they're not serious about their work. She's spending or he's spending too much time doing these other things, and they're not focusing on what their job is, right? So there's a balance to be had, but I generally find them to be enjoyable and a good way to build your internal brand, right, and to network internally, and maybe create something new and have something you can add to your resume, so to speak, when it comes time for promotion.
Thank you.
To me, it's absolutely critical. Take advantage of these opportunities. And as Michele said, if your work is solid and everything is going well from a performance standpoint, but you build those extra relationships. And I would also volunteer externally. And sometimes through those activities, you build skills that you cannot build internally. And every set of additional skills you build and every set of extra contacts you make provide you with an advantage. And you never know when people you meet on the outside know people on the inside where you work. So either way, you cannot hurt yourself by doing the volunteer work and volunteering for projects and things. But again, as Michele said, make sure you're on top of your job.
Right.
Everything else is just on top of that. It's going to mean more hours, but it just opens up doors and it gives you more skills. It makes you a more competitive candidate.
Yep. Thank you. Ben Wong has a really important question, especially for those Yalies in our event tonight. Those who are out of school for a number of years and are maybe thinking about going to graduate school. His question is, when does it make sense to seek on-the-job experience to move up the career ladder versus when does it make sense to go to graduate school? And then how do you choose a program that's right for your goals?
I think first it's a great question. I think first you should do a little research around it, right? So really, whether it's informational interviews, reading articles, again, this is a network that you're part of, right? Reaching out to other alums who've made that decision. I'm thinking, this is what I ultimately think I want to do. And I'm thinking about, whether trying to do it internally or I'm getting a graduate degree in whatever area you're interested in, right? So that you can, I think I love going to school. So for me, I always think that that's a good thing. But if it's not what you necessarily need, or if for some reason it potentially could derail you from what you're trying to achieve, it would be helpful to know that, right? I think depending on the sort of technical nature of what you're doing, jobs in certain roles, I think extra degrees or extra certifications are seen as helpful, but not necessary. And sometimes it's completely necessary. So again, researching the field you want to go to, what are traditional requirements? I'm a big fan of looking at job descriptions. Don't worry about where the job is if you're not really applying, but go online, search for jobs in the area you're interested in and look at the requirements, and you will start to see patterns and requirements. And that's another way to see what the market is expecting for people that are doing those types of things, so that can be another touch point to inform you. But I think if you're also paying for that and or borrowing money for it, I think before you commit to it, it's also in your best interest to be sure it's what you want to do, both personally as well as professionally.
And what I would add to that would be, look at the people who are on the fast track. What are their backgrounds? And if you notice that all the people at the top and all the people on the way to their top all have law degrees or MBAs or combination degrees or whatever, those are signals. But if they have none of those things and you're pursuing one, that might not help you at that particular organization or maybe in that type of work. So I agree with Michele, do your research, but do that research also on the individual level in terms of those who perceive as being on the fast track, because they know what they need to do to keep moving ahead. And if they're not doing that, you have to wonder, why am I doing something completely different than everyone else is?
Right. That's great. Thank you. We have 5 minutes left. So Michael, I think it's time maybe for your poll. And so I'm going to turn it over to Valerie. And maybe you want to introduce the poll idea and what we're doing and why we're doing it.
What we're trying to do is, one, we want to make sure that these webinars are the most effective they can be for the audience. And we also want to know what areas, if we do future webinars, what you're interested in. So this will give us a sense of that. This will only take a few minutes. Valerie's going to bring the poll up now. If you can complete that, and then we'll close the program after that. Valerie, I leave it up to you. And Valerie, are there any instructions that they need?
What?
Are there any instructions that people need, or is it pretty straightforward?
So you should all see the poll up on your screens right now, and you should be able to answer the questions. If you can't, drop a note in the chat and let us know. But the poll's been launched.
Valerie, I don't see it.
I see it.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I don't know how to.
I see it as well.
You all see it? Okay, good.
Yes, it's working.
Great. And then Valerie, will you read the results? Or Michael?
I'll let Valerie read them because she can probably see the screen better than I can.
Okay.
Sure, I'll read them out as soon as we get every answer tabulated.
And share the poll results as well.
Pretty, Camellia.
While we're rating, Lisa, do you want to talk about 1stGenYale's
Sure.
501c3
Sure,
status?
sure. And you let me know when the polls are finished. Yes, I want to thank everybody for joining us. 1stGenYale is an alumni-led shared interest group of the Yale Alumni Association. We were founded in 2016 of first generation low-income alumni who wanted to help our first generation low-income students succeed at Yale and beyond. So it's my honor and privilege to have been to be the founder and also to be the current president. So, but it's not just about us or me, it's about a team. And we have a very diverse team of alumni who help lead 1stGenYale, as well as a number of volunteers such as Valerie and others who come in and help us run events, webinars, on-site programs and the like. So it's really a community of Yale alumni who want to help each other and help fellow students succeed. So I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Michelle and Michael while the poll is being tabulated for your wonderful conversation today and all the comments we're getting from the participants. Thank you. Michelle, we have also had comments. Are you for hire? Can alumni hire you and or Michael to help be their personal coach? So you can respond to that in a minute. I'm also an honor and privilege to let everybody know we have just been accepted by the federal government and the Internal Revenue Service. So 1stGenYale is an official 501c3 nonprofit organization. We've been asked by a number of alumni over the years if how do people contribute to us, not just their time and talent, but if they'd like to make a donation to help our programming going forward, yes, you can, and it's tax deductible. So this is our first time actually announcing it to the public. We'll be putting it on our website as well. But if you'd like to make a contribution to 1stGenYale, just make it to 1stGenYale Inc. And you can send it to 307 Forest Drive South, Short Hills, New Jersey, 07078. And I will give your wonderful contribution to Angela Ladino, class of 12, who is our treasurer. So thank you very much for everyone for being here tonight. And I'm going to turn it back to Valerie for the poll results.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Thanks for everybody for contributing to the poll. Appreciate your taking the time to answer the questions. I'm going to share the results now. We can go through them together. Can everybody see the poll results on your screens?
Yep.
You should be able to. So the first question, I learned something that I will use in my personal career planning. Majority of you strongly agree. That's wonderful, is what we like to hear.
I would refer a webinar like this to others. Also strongly agree. That's good because we hope to have more of these in the future, and as many people as possible who can attend would be fantastic. Most helpful part of the webinar. The third choice, learn about actions which you can take to increase your chances of promotion. That was one of the major goals for us. So Michelle, Michael, well done. 4, what are your recommendations for how this webinar could have been improved? Host a second webinar. Wow. Okay, great. That's exactly what we wanted to hear. Always nice to see that. And then 5, overall participation in the webinar was a good use of my time. Strongly agree. Topics for future webinars. This is the question about which we're very curious because, as Michael said, as Lisa said earlier, we're hoping to host many more of these in the future, and your input about the topics that are most salient to you, your careers, your transitions, your promotions, your changes, all of these things are an important factor in thinking about what we're going to do in the and what kinds of programs we're going to host. So it looks like how to negotiate a raise is a very popular topic for future webinars, along with when to change jobs. Supposedly there's going to be a big reshuffling now that the pandemic is ending. And in line with that, how to decide it is time to leave your organization, also at the top of that list. So we're going to keep these, we're going to download them, we're going to take a look, and the 1stGenYale team is going to examine them and then decide what we'll put on in the future. Lisa, Michael, back over to you.
Valerie, thank you. So I just want to say our next event coming up, we have a few more webinars we're working on, but our next event is going to be on Saturday, July 24th. It is our 6th annual. We're honored to be part of the first year scholars program at Yale, in which now 90 incoming first year students are invited to spend 6 weeks at Yale. Basically to an introduction to Yale, to the faculty, to courses, to the curriculum, to people, to resources. The students take 2 classes, so it gives them a leg up, which is fantastic. And we're part of that program, and we bring alumni to them. We're going to be doing virtually again. And we have an alumni panel with the faculty moderator. And we talk about our experiences at Yale, being first gen and or low income, what resources we took advantage of, how we spoke up, how we developed our career interests or extracurricular activities, and anything along the way of how we managed our home life versus our school life, and how we changed and what we did, and how we let our parents know that we were different now coming to Yale, and lots of other topics, including how to take advantage of research seminars and research summer programs. So stay tuned. You're going to get an email. If you're on this email, you will get an email inviting you to volunteer and join us. It's virtually. It's from 2 to 5 on Saturday, July 24th. And so look forward to seeing you to come join us. And I'm going to turn it back to Michael.
Well, I know we're at time now, but thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you for your ideas. If you think of other things you want to communicate to us, send that to 1stgenyale.org, I believe, and we go from there. But we look forward to our next webinar. We'll communicate that as soon as it's developed. And have a great evening, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks again to Michael for creating this. This is the second in the Career Speaker Series, and joining him, Michele Moorman. We're so glad to see you, Michele, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the future at our future events for 1stGenYale. And Valerie, thank you again for your wonderful work with Zoom and helping orchestrate this. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.